Before moving on to the next section and MongoDB, I want to show you how to set up ESLint together with Prettier in VS Code in order to improve our code quality. Now, if you're not using VS Code, or if you already have some kind of linter in your workflow, then please mark this lecture as completed and move on right to the next section. But if you're new to ESLint and want to improve your code quality, then let's get started with this video. So ESLint is basically a program that constantly scans our code and finds potential coding errors or simply bad coding practices that it thinks are wrong. And it's very configurable so that we can really fine-tune it to our needs and coding habits. Now we can also use ESLint for code formatting, but we will continue using Prettier that we already set up earlier for that. So we will set up this entire thing so that Prettier is still the main code formatter, but based on some ESLint rules that we will define. And so all that ESLint will do for us is to highlight the errors. But I know that all this probably sounds more confusing than anything else, and so let's actually set this up now. So the first thing that I want you to do is to install the ESLint extension for VS Code. So come over here and search for ESLint. Okay, and I already have it installed, but it looks like this. And so all you need to do is to go ahead and install it and then probably reload this window. And if you don't have Prettier set up yet, then go ahead and do that one as well. So this extension here, but this one we actually already did in the first section if you followed that with me. Next up, we need to install a bunch of dev dependencies. So let's actually make this here a lot bigger and go to our other terminal here. And so let's say npm install, and we need to also install ESLint in Prettier as npm packages. Okay, so ESLint in Prettier, and probably this is now the first time where we are actually installing multiple packages at the same time. And so that's very easy. We simply write all these packages all in the same command. Okay, but with these two, we are actually far from ready. So the next one is ESLint config Prettier. And this one will disable formatting for ESLint, because remember, we want Prettier to format our code. Next up, we have ESLint plugin Prettier. And this one will allow ESLint to show formatting errors as we type, again using Prettier. Okay, and all of this is of course very confusing, and I needed a lot of time to figure this out. And so this really is just a recipe that you need to follow here. Okay, so it's not about understanding what I'm doing here. All you need to do is to follow this recipe, and it will then work for this project. And in future projects, then all you have to do is to go to your package.json file and copy that configuration and install it in your next project. Because actually all of these packages, they have to be installed locally. It would not work if we tried to do this globally. All right. Anyway, we need now some JavaScript style guide that we can follow. And there are many style guides out there, but the most popular one is probably the Airbnb style guide. And so actually there is an ESLint configuration that we can use for that, which is on npm, and it's called ESLint config Airbnb. Okay, next up we have ESLint plugin Node, and this will add a couple of specific ESLint rules only for Node.js. Okay, so basically to find some errors that we might be doing when writing Node.js code. And now finally we need 3 other ESLint plugins, which are only necessary in order to make the Airbnb style guide actually work. So that style guide kind of depends on these. So ESLint plugin import ESLint plugin JSX A11Y, and I see that I have a mistake here. And finally ESLint plugin React. So even though we're not writing any React code here, we still need this one because the Airbnb style guide depends on it. So these are all the packages. I hope that I wrote them correctly. And now we need to save these as dev dependencies. So save dev, and now hit return, and cross your fingers that everything is going to work here. So it seems like it did. Let's take a look at our package.json. And indeed, here we have all of these packages. Great. Now the next step is that we need config files for both Prettier and ESLint, right? And we already created the one for Prettier before, and it's already in our project here. So it's this one, and all I did here was to say that I always want the single quotes. Okay? And the other one is the config file for ESLint, and again, it's already in the starter files, because we don't really need to waste any time simply just to write this terrible configuration file, right? So the file is already written. Let's just go very quickly through it. So here we say that we want to use the Airbnb style guide and also Prettier and also the Node plugin. Okay? Now ESLint is all about coding rules, and there are many rules that ESLint tries to enforce on us. But we can actually change the ones that we want to use one by one, and we can whether turn them off completely or just showing a warning instead of showing an error. For example, one rule is that ESLint does not want us to use console.logs in our code. And so each time by default, it will give us an error when we use console.log. But instead of showing me an error, I configured it so that it only shows me a warning. Okay, so that's why we have warn. I could also completely turn it off by writing off, such as I did with many of these other rules. So for example, here in this next one, which says that each and every function should always return something, okay? And sometimes we simply have a function which doesn't, and so I needed to turn this rule completely off. Or finally, we also have, for example, this rule here, which says that there should never be a variable that we declare but do not use. And this actually catches a lot of bugs, and so I leave it as an error here, but I also created some exceptions. So these 4 exceptions here, which are the typical variables that we have in Express, so in our handlers in Express, but that we don't always use, right? And so I don't want these to be marked as errors each time that I have, for example, a rec variable in a function, but I don't use it, okay? So you can take a look at these other rules here and decide which one you like and which one you don't. So these ones are the rules that make sense to me, but of course it might be different for you. Let's just quickly go to the ESLint website to take a look at all the stuff that you can configure. So ESLint. Then here you have some documentation and some instructions on how you can configure it. But all I really want to show you is all these different rules. So you have all of them in here. And so you see there's a ton really of them that you can configure. Okay? So take a look at this, but actually it's easier to simply configure this ESLint whenever you get a new error in your code. Okay, so let me show that to you so that we can now see it in practice. So let's go to our server file here and simply create some code here that goes against some ES rules. So for example, defining a variable here like this and then assigning something else to it. All right. And so we know that x is a constant, and so it should not be reassigned. So if we give this now a sign, we should actually see an error. And well, we did not. So I'm going to go ahead and close the window and then open it again. So do that as well, and hopefully it will be working by then. Okay, and so actually we see our errors here now marked in red. So we now come to this problems tab. Let me move it up a bit. And so here we see all the errors that we have. So starting with the first one, expected one empty line after the require statement not followed by another require. So basically what it's telling me is that it wants these requires here at the top and then an empty line and then like this. And so the error disappeared. Okay, and so this kind of enforces a nicer coding standard. Next up we have x is assigned and the value never used. And so that is that no unused variables that I mentioned before. So this one here. Okay, and so this is an error, but I could also turn it off just to show you how that would then change. So I saved it, and so now that error is gone. So you see it's no longer marked red. But actually I want this to be an error. So I write error, give it a save, and our error is back. You see, it is declared, but it's never used. And then here x is constant. So we really did an error here, which was to reassign a constant, and that is not allowed. So let's get rid of this, and then the error disappears. We still have this one because the value has never been used. Let's quickly write x plus 2, and now it's gone. But we have the next error, basically simply because we just have this code sitting around here, not assigned to anything. So let's just say const y equals this one, but then of course y is assigned but never used, and so we're entering this loop here. Okay, but anyway, this was just to demonstrate it to you. And so let's see now the final warning. And so that is the no console, right? So remember, I actually talked about this one before, and it is green because it's a warning. So again, I could turn it off, and then my problem would disappear. So the code would look normal now, but actually I want ESLint to warn me about that, because it's not a good practice to have all too many console logs later in production. All right. So it's back now, and actually VS Code also warns me that there is a green warning here in this file. So maybe you noticed that before, but if we put an error here, then actually it will turn red. Okay, so now it's red, and we have 2 problems in there. And that's actually really helpful to identify problems in all these files. All right, let's get rid of it. And so actually, that's it. So I hoped that it worked for you as well. If you got some error, then please try to simply install the same packages that I did. So all of these here. And remember that this is how you do it. So for example, if you want ESLint 5, just say npm I ESLint add 5. For example, you can even go 5.16.0 just to make really sure that everything is the same. And in that case, everything should work just as it did here for me. Great. So this was yet another important step in your journey of becoming a developer. Because believe me, it's really important to have code linting in place like you have now. So again, for your next project, just go ahead, copy these dependencies into your package.json file, and then install them all at the same time, and that will then make your life a lot easier. So that's how I always do it. And the same, of course, with the Prettier RC and this ESLint config file. Anyway, enough talking for this video. We're now finally ready to move on to the very important MongoDB section.